Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte.
If you get some young kids who are coming in, manage to sneak into the United States with their parents, our Department of Homeland Security personnel going to separate the children from their moms and dads.
Yes, I am considering, in order to deter more movement along this terribly dangerous network, I am considering exactly that. They will be well cared for as we deal with their parents.
General Kelly later claimed he never said that he was considering using family separation as an immigration deterrent. But it looks like the practice is happening anyway. According to a lawsuit just filed by the ACLU, a 39-year-old Congolese woman seeking asylum in the United States was detained by immigration officials, along with her 7-year-old daughter. At first, they were detained together in San Diego, but then, according to the ACLU, for no clear reason, government officials took the child away from her mom and moved her to a facility in Chicago. The two have been separated for 4 months. Joining me now is Lee Gallant, Deputy Director of the ACLU's Immigrants' Rights Project, who's representing the mother identified as Miss L. This is a horrific story. Lee, explain to us what happened to this mom and her daughter.
Yeah, absolutely horrific. And unfortunately, it's not the only situation. It's widespread across the country. So this woman and child came to the U.S. seeking asylum. And importantly, they had an initial asylum screening interview, passed. The mother passed, which means she has a significant possibility of ultimately attaining asylum.
Okay.
They put them together for 4 days. After 4 days, they brought the child into another room. This is from the mother telling me in anguishing detail. She heard the daughter screaming in the next room, "Please don't take me away from my mommy. Please don't take me away from my..." That's the last time she's seen her daughter. It's been nearly 4 months. She's had approximately 6 phone calls with her daughter in 4 months, not even a video connection. She was not told where her daughter is going, why her daughter is being taken. It was even 4 days before she got to speak to her daughter. This mother, like any mother, is just in gut-wrenching anguish.
Is she being accused of some, abuse or some reason why she cannot be with her daughter, or is this literally just punitive to punish her for trying to seek asylum?
Well, interestingly, the government has never said why they're doing it, but they've never asserted that she was abusive or neglectful or in any way an unfit mother.
General Kelly, when he was the head of Homeland Security, said, we just played it on Fox News, that he was willing to use family separation as a deterrent, essentially as a way to stop people from trying to come to the United States from, I guess, countries that Kelly and Trump, et cetera, don't want people from, the Democratic Republic of Congo.
So these families, and particularly children, I mean, there are children 7 years old or even younger, are just pawns now in some kind of crazy public policy experiment. Now the administration seems to be backing off and saying, well, we're still contemplating whether to formalize it as a national policy. What people need to understand is whether or not it's called a quote-unquote policy, it's happening in practice. It is widespread. We're hearing about hundreds of parents and little kids being separated.
And are these parents and kids from specific countries and regions of the world?
They're from all different countries. So this family we're representing now is from the Congo. They're from a variety of countries. Deterring asylum seekers is just wrong and illegal. People have a right to apply for asylum. and you cannot take a mother and child and separate them. The medical community is overwhelmingly denouncing this policy.
Absolutely. The pediatricians have warned against family separation. The American Academy of Pediatrics in March of 2017 issued a finding that federal authorities must exercise caution to ensure that the emotional and physical stress children experience as they seek refuge in the United States is not exacerbated by the additional trauma of being separated from their siblings, parents, or other relatives and caregivers. How long are they keeping these families apart on average?
Months and months. You know, we're trying to get at it. The government is not giving us information, so we're trying to find all the different families, and sometimes the children don't even know where the parents are and vice versa, and the lawyers for the two don't know where each other are. We were lucky to find out where this parent and child were so we could bring this lawsuit, but we will continue to fight this nationwide. This is not the end of what we're going to do.
And it seems extraordinary to me that a government of a country that claims to be a compassionate nation would think that there's any good reason to separate a little child, a 7-year-old, from her mom and held them separately. Are they being held in some sort of incarceration? Is it house arrest? Where are these two?
The mother is in a prison, you know, flat out.
She's in a prison.
Whatever you want to call it, it's a prison, right? It houses immigration detainees and criminal defendants. And the daughter is in a facility. And so the question is not really whether, if the daughter had no parents, whether the facility is adequate.
Yeah.
It's the fact that she is crying for her mother every day. She's a little 7-year-old girl, and the mother, it can't sleep or eat because she's worried about the daughter. There is no legitimate reason for doing this. Any reason would be because this administration thinks if the word goes out around the world, you may lose your child, you will risk persecution or death in your own country rather than risk losing your child. And
has the government indicated to you, as the attorneys, that this mother could get her daughter back if she chooses to leave?
They have not said that in a specific case, but that's what we are hearing all around the country. People are being told, oh, you want your kid back? Just give up and leave.
Unconscionable, disgusting, and shameful. These are the only words I can use to describe this. Legal Learn, thank you very much for shedding light on this.
It is Tuesday, the 6th of March of 2018, and you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam. Our daily special is Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays. And yes, it is, folks, and you are in the Bistro Cafe part of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. And thank you for joining us. I get quite livid when I think about, well, the tectonic leanings of certain aspects of our bureaucracy. And separating a mother and a child. There was another very, very authoritarian construct certainly within my mother's lifetime. And it didn't go well for them when they rounded up people and oftentimes separated mother and child. And oftentimes they just found it just such a joy to keep mother and child together and gas them together too, because, you know, efficiency. Got to make the trains run on time, and they did. So this is the terrible road that we are going down, and it must stop. Someone coming to our shores seeking asylum. Asylum. The beacon that draws the world. Come to our shores for sanctuary. And now the mere word sanctuary is a crime? I mean, this guy Holman running ICE, yeah, he hates sanctuary. And he's making people suffer. So I suppose it also is within this emotional, mental dysfunction in this current administration that someone who is seeking asylum is, by definition, a loser. And we don't like losers here, okay? I mean, this is America. We're winners, no matter what. Okay, well, Sam Nunberg blew up on TV. No, I don't know. I mean, I wondered at the ethics of allowing this fellow to discorporate, so to speak, live before our eyes. Was that Was that a responsible thing to do? I kept thinking, I'm sorry, not thinking. I kept seeing Faye Dunaway in Network in the control booth with some of the producers going, "This is great TV," and it was great TV. That's what TV lives for, is that kind of spectacle. I thought it might have been also on another, flip of the coin. I thought it was a very odd strategy for grand jury nullification. A lot of these public displays are for the nullification of a jury, but can a grand jury actually be nullified? I don't think so. So he did, after he calmed down, and some people say after he sobered up, that he talked to Dad and his lawyer. And good thing he has a lawyer. Too bad his lawyer didn't know what was going on. Maybe the lawyer slept in. Who knows? But I suppose I guess once Nunberg is in front of the cameras, or at least on the phone with Katie Tour, that's how it started. Once that happens, you can't just run in there and stop it. I guess. But he talked to his lawyer and Dad, and I guess maybe he will go ahead and sit before the grand jury. And this subpoena is so narrow, and he's like whining, "Oh, I have to do all these work." And then it turns out I'm not going to turn in Roger. Yeah, okay, Roger Stone. All right, Roger Stone. I'm telling you. If you get mentored by rat effers, don't be surprised if you get rat effed. It happens. Others are also saying that this was all dramatic street theater to divert attention away from, Russia actually not only meddling in the election, but meddling within the construction of the cabinet. Isn't that an interesting tidbit of information? Yeah, and this ties in with the Nunberg thing because according to the subpoena, Mueller is only asking for emails and communications up to 2015. And Nunberg said, I've been working on Trump's campaign for president since 2011. Oh, have you now? Well, we'll just have to look at communications for that too. Mm-hmm. So, lots and lots of news going on in the world as usual, and let's talk about what we're curating today. Well, starting off in the Bistro Cafe part of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays. Let's see, TrumpBros in D.C., that would be Washington, D.C., are whining that liberal women want no part in dating them. Yeah, as soon as they find out, like, you're part of the Trump administration, it's like a black mark, and no one wants to date you. Well, there is a solution to that problem. And you know what it is. The Broward County Police Union will not defend Florida's, and this is in quotes, coward sheriff's deputy, but not for the reason you would think. Mm-hmm. I don't think he was a coward. I think he was following rules. But that's just me. And, how convenient, a man who was critically ill after being exposed to an unknown substance near Salisbury, England, is a Russian national convicted in Russia of spying for Britain. Very convenient. After the break, we'll move to the chef's table to examine how a strange Supreme Court case involving sex offenders could gut the EPA. Talk about intersectionality. And an Ohio town offers an inspiring approach to integrating people with developmental disabilities into the community. Because we're Americans. Come on, neighbor. Let me help you out. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. If you go to the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com, to the rightish of the page there, you'll notice the chat room link. Roaring Girl, our Kelly Lincoln, monitors that very diligently. And, well, she should, because we're doing it for you folks. And if you have any concerns or requests or anything, that is one way to connect with us. Follow us on Twitter at Netroots Radio. Tom takes care of that platform. And we're on Facebook, too. I think Kelly sort of takes care of that. I post show note links and whatnot there, so you can check out that. And let's see. Oh, and then, of course, my daily diary that I put up for show notes and links is at Daily Co's, and I can be found on Daily Co's as Justice Putnam. To the rightish of the chat room link are the contribute donate buttons. We will be migrating those accounts, and I don't know what that means, other than hopefully it's a seamless thing, and you folks who are contributing so generously so we can keep the lights on here, like it's no work or little work for you. So we're trying to figure that out. And so thank you, yes, indeed, for your generosity. Music here in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy is provided by Frances Livings, and she is down in Southern California and performs all over the Southland, so check her out. And links to her work can be found on my show notes and links diary. So please check it and check her out. Alrighty, so this first story here in the that we'll attend to in the Bistro Cafe part of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays is an article by Brad Reed out of Raw Story. Now, conservative men living in Donald Trump's Washington, D.C. are complaining that liberal women in the city are unfairly judging them for their political beliefs. I don't know. I hate to say it. It's not prejudging if they've post-judged, okay? I'm just saying. Multiple conservatives say who talked with this publication called the Washingtonian, say that they have had more trouble getting dates in the wake of Trump's election, and even if they aren't Trump supporters, they are being tarred with the same brush. Yeah, well, you know, there was a lot of Nazis in Nazi Germany that really had a lot of trouble getting dates after they started rounding people up and marching them to the camps. And even if you weren't a Nazi Party member, you could get tarred with the same brush if you just stood by and were a good German. All right. The policies and the things that are attached to the right, whether or not you're a supporter of Trump, have been presupposed on you, and it's like a black mark, says one reporter at a conservative publication. I'm sorry. I don't know. It's probably wrong of me to put down these fellows because, you know, I guess I could take the position, well, I've never had trouble getting a date. But if you ever read my short story, The Princess and the Frog, you'll know that when I was just a mere tadpole, my frog aunts dressed me up in a little frog tuxedo and took me to the Brown Derby, and we sat in our frog booth. And that is where I learned etiquette and the ways of the world. All right. So apparently these frogs never got to put on a frog suit, tuxedo, or go to the Brown Derby. When the Brown Derby actually existed, I know there's at least 2 generations of people who have no idea what I'm talking about when I mention the Brown Derby. It was like Cantor's, except with nicer tablecloths and real silverware too. Okay, this article continues. The political divide has gotten so wide that a lot of young liberals don't have any interest in meeting conservatives. Oh, really? I wonder why. Yeah. Whine. One current Trump administration official says that he has trouble getting women to go on dates with him as soon as they find out who his boss is. A lot of times you'll connect with someone on an app and they'll Google you, find out you work for Trump's campaign, and then it's pretty much all downhill from there. Work for rat effers and just don't be surprised if you get rat effed. Next offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays, is by Carlin Becker by way of Rare magazine. I have a big ambivalence about this police officer, resource officer, 35-year veteran, by the way, for Broward County, assigned to the high school in which the shooting took place in Florida, calling him a coward. I must confess, my first assessment is I called him an oafin from, Corporal Oafin from Saving Private Ryan, the guy who froze. But I don't think he froze. When I had time to think about it, his first call-in was that he was looking for a shooter outside the buildings. And the report of the gunfire as it resonated against all the different buildings would make it very confusing. I've told the story about my brother, former law enforcement officer, down in the kill zone in Las Vegas. They had no idea where the gunfire was coming from. And they wouldn't have been able to do much about it, even with semi-automatic weapons, if they had happened to be carrying them to a country music concert out in the open in Las Vegas. Just saying. But the reason this Scott Peterson, Sheriff's Deputy Scott Peterson, is not going to get help from his union, it's not because he's a coward or assessed being a coward. The reason the union will not represent him or help him is because he has never paid union dues. All right? So let that be a lesson to you. You never know when you might need the union to step in. Now, by law, the union has to include him in any collective bargaining agreement. But the union rules also stipulate that they don't have to, put up their money to defend you if you're caught in a situation where usually the union comes in and they'll say, well, he was so afraid he had to kill that black guy. So in this situation, if you're not a union dues member, in your time of need, when you've reaped all of the benefits, all of the pay benefits, all of the sick time, you get used to it. Like, oh, I'm getting everything that everybody else is. I don't have to pay the dues. Big bad union. So pay your union dues. All right? That's the bigger lesson in that story. Finishing up here in the Bistro Cafe part of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy is a story out of I got this from the BBC. Now CNN has picked it up as well. This is a very strange case. A critically ill man has turned out to be a former Russian spy. After being exposed to an unknown substance in Wiltshire, he's a Russian national convicted of spying for Britain. Sergei Skripal, age 66, was granted refuge in the UK following a spy swap between the US and Russia in 2010. He and a 33-year-old woman were found unconscious on a bench at a shopping center in Salisbury on Sunday. And just now an update. 33-year-old woman is his daughter. The mystery deepens. ZZ Restaurant in Salisbury has been closed by police as a precaution. The substance has not been identified, but Public Health England said there was no known risk to the public's health. Wiltshire police are investigating whether a crime has been committed. They said the pair had no visible injuries, but had been found unconscious at the Malting shopping center. They have declared a major incident, and multiple agencies are investigating. They said it had been declared as a counterterrorism incident, but they were keeping an open mind. Cole Skripal, who is a retired Russian military intelligence officer, was jailed for 13 years by Russia in 2006 for spying for Britain. He was convicted of passing the identities of Russian intelligence officers and agents working undercover in Europe to UK's secret intelligence service, MI6, which we might want to acknowledge the fact that that was where Christopher Steele was working as well. Connection? The mystery deepens, doesn't it? Russia said Cole Skripal had been paid $100,000 for the information which he had been supplying from the 1990s. He was one of 4 prisoners released by Moscow in exchange for 10 U.S. spies in 2010 as part of a swap, and Cole Skripal was later flown to the U.K. Now, both he and his daughter are in intensive care at Salisbury District Hospital. Okay, let's see. There was eyewitnesses told the BBC it looked like the 2 people had taken something quite strong. One woman said on the bench there was a couple, an older guy and a younger girl. She sort of leaned in on him. It looked like she had passed out, maybe. He was doing some strange hand movements, looking up at the sky. They looked so out of it, even if I did step in, I wasn't sure how I could help, she summarized. Now, the possibility of an unexplained substance being involved has drawn comparisons with the 2006 poisoning of Alexander Litvenko. The Russian dissident died in London in 1926 after drinking tea laced with a radioactive substance, polonium, one of those convenient polonium poisonings. A public inquiry concluded that his killing had probably been carried out with the approval of Russian President Vladimir Putin. Okay. Now the parallels are striking with the 2006 case of Litvinenko. He, too, was a former Russian intelligence officer who had come to the UK and was taken ill for reasons that were initially unclear. In that case, it took weeks to establish the cause was deliberate poisoning, and it took close to a decade before a public inquiry pointed the finger of blame at the Russian state. All right. So the article goes on to explain who Colonel Skripal was, and he had been convicted of high treason in the form of espionage by Moscow military court in August of 26. He was stripped of all his titles and awards. And he had been passing information classified as state secrets and been paid for the work by MI6. And he, I'm sure, worked very close with Christopher Steele, who was, well, let's be clear, the Russian expert at MI6. All right, let's get to our break, and we'll come back and go through the weather and finish up with the rest of what we have to offer here at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. So you are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
This is Take Two Movie Review. I'm Mike Friend. This week, Mother meets a rival. The term annihilation has a meaning in particle physics, and it underlies existence as we know it. Transfer to genetics, and such are the stakes in Alex Garland's latest, Annihilation. Living up to the elegant minimalism we saw in his Ex Machina, the setup for the story is simply what looks like a meteor striking a lighthouse in what appears to be the Gulf Coast region. Around this strike, an area develops called the Shimmer, due to photo-optic effects that surround it and into which expeditions go, but do not return. Authorities speculate as to whether expedition members are being killed or going crazy and killing each other, which is certainly an effective setup for the action. As the film opens, cellular biologist Lena's husband, Kane, returns from a military operation where he'd been presumed KIA, remembering nothing before passing out and then being taken into custody on the way to hospital. The film also ends with Lena and Kane in custody in a government medical facility, but only after a bizarre, non-linear story documenting Lena and the team's journey into the Shimmer. It would be easy in a film like this to allow the beautiful and the grotesque, woven into what might be the strangest horrorscape you'll ever see, to supplant character development. But Natalie Portman's Lena, Jennifer Jason Leigh's Dr. Ventress, the expedition leader, and other members of the all-female team have credible backstories, all of which more or less fit into the theme of distortion and destruction of heretofore unsuspected underpinnings of science and life. Annihilation is the eponymous adaptation of the first of Jeff Vandermeer's Southern Reach novel trilogy, so the sense of inconclusion you'll have coming out of this one is probably as it should be. This has been Take Two Movie Review. I'm Mike Friend. Catch up with us at Take2MovieReview.com and feed us back on our page on YouTube.
This is Scientific American's 60-Second Science. I'm Karen Hopkin. Nature may be red in tooth and claw, but one plucky caterpillar dresses in orange and black to avoid becoming somebody's lunch. What's really surprising, though, is that this distinctive set of stripes can serve as both a warning or as camouflage, depending on how far away it is from the viewer. Animals can deploy color as a defense mechanism in a couple of ways. Some shades and patterns help potential prey blend into the background, whereas bold markings often serve as a signal that an animal is unpalatable. For example, chock full of toxins.
So these two strategies have often been considered in isolation and often seen as mutually exclusive and alternative mechanisms. But under natural conditions, you find this distinction is less clear-cut.
Jim Barnett of the University of Bristol, who led the study to explore whether the same coloration might do double duty, allowing an animal to be obvious under some conditions, but unseen in others. They focused their attention on the caterpillars of cinnabar moths. These larvae sport bright orange and black stripes. Their vivid appearance was believed to remind the birds who may have eaten others of their kind that they are none too tasty, thanks to their diet of alkaloid-rich ragwort plants. The researchers snapped photos of the caterpillars in suburban green spaces around Bristol, and they used a visual modeling program to give them a bird's-eye view of what the caterpillars look like, either close up or from farther away.
And what we found is that although at close range the caterpillar's stripes are highly conspicuous, these bright colours distinguish it quite easily from its ragwort background. but when viewed from distance, they blend together to form a colour which is actually quite difficult to discern from the background colour. So what we think is going on is that the caterpillar is getting the best of both worlds.
Close up, the stripes say, keep your distance. But from a distance, they allow the caterpillars to hide in plain sight. The results can be seen in the journal Royal Society Open Science. The finding is a reminder, don't forget to step back and see things from a different perspective. Thanks for listening. For Scientific American's 60-Second Science, I'm Karen Hopkin.
Welcome to 60-Second Civics, the daily podcast of the Center for Civic Education. I'm Mark Gage. Americans have many rights that are protected by the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. Our rights are also protected by state constitutions and bills of rights. However, it is important to remember that it is reasonable and fair to place limits on most rights. They're not absolute. Most people would argue that the only right that cannot be limited is freedom of belief. All other rights can be limited in certain situations. For example, freedom of expression can be limited if and when it seriously harms or endangers others. A person cannot yell fire in a crowded theater if there is, in fact, no fire. Doing so would put the health and safety of others at risk. Some rights may be limited when they conflict with other rights or with other important values and interests. For example, the right to own and use property can conflict with our interest in having a safe and healthy environment. That's all for today's podcast, 60-Second Civics, where civic education only takes a minute.
Almost 150 years after ratification of the post-Civil War 15th Amendment, which guarantees the right to vote. Why is that right? Not really. A right. I'm Bill Newman, and this is the Civil Liberties Minute. One culprit is felony disenfranchisement. 12 states prohibit persons who have been convicted of a crime, but who have served their sentence and been released from jail or prison and have finished all of their probation or parole, all of that done, finished, over. They're still not allowed to vote. The undisputed leader in felony disenfranchisement is Florida. In 1984, the Sunshine State disenfranchised 2.6% of its eligible voting age population. But get this. By 2016, over 10% of all Florida voters were denied the right to cast a ballot on the basis that at some point in their life they had committed a crime. That is 21% of all of the black citizen potential voters in that state. A federal district court recently ruled that the Florida process for restoring voting rights is so cumbersome and so standardless that it's unconstitutional. But the remedy in that case and the appeals to come stretch out far into the future. A century and a half after ratification of the 15th Amendment, which guarantees Americans the right to vote, isn't it time for voting to become an actual right? The Civil Liberties Minute is made possible by the ACLU because freedom can't protect itself.
This is Solidarity News on Radio Labour.
This is a Radio Labour special report recorded on Monday, March 5th, 2018. I'm Mark Boulanger. It is often the case that governments have to be forced to provide their workers with the capability of joining unions and bargaining collective agreements. But even when they relent and pass legislation to allow for unions, they can find ways to hinder the process. Take Mozambique, for example. Mozambique is a country of about 29 million people in Southeast Africa. In 2014, after years of pressure from the labor movement and the UN's International Labor Organization, Mozambique finally passed legislation legalizing unions in the public sector. But it has been making the registration of unions and collective bargaining very difficult. I talked to Tichona Fambisa about the situation in Mozambique. Mr. Fambisa is the Southern Africa Project Coordinator for the Global Union Public Services International. The PSI represents some 20 million public sector workers who are members of 700 unions in 163 countries. I asked Mr. Fambisa to describe the labor union law Mozambique adopted in 2014.
According to the government, The purpose for passing this law was to deepen social dialogue with the trade unions as partners. Up to 2014, there was no law regulating trade unionism in the public sector in Mozambique. And because of that, a trade union could not legally operate in the country. So what the law basically does is to provide a legal framework within which trade unions can be formed, registered, and operate.
Is the law being effective? Are there problems implementing it?
The law has some problematic causes, and I'll just give you a quick rundown of those ones. The first one is the law makes no provision for strikes in the public sector. It says there has to be a specific law yet to be promulgated that has to create a legal framework for strikes in the public sector. So in essence, strikes are illegal in the public sector in Mozambique. And then number two, the law prohibits a number of categories of workers in the public sector from being covered by the law. The law says that there shall be no freedom of association for officials of the state who render services in the defense and security services, in the correctional services, in the emergency services, in the paramilitary forces, in the customs and revenue services, in the courts, in the presidents, and the National Assembly. However, the greatest cause for concern with the law are the clauses which refer to the registration of a union in the public sector. Article 37 of the law says an organization can be constituted into a trade union when it is representative of a number of workers and state agents that is not less than 5% of all workers and state agents. Well, a look at the 5% threshold may lead one to say this is very low. However, if it is read together with Article 10, the nature of the problem begins to manifest. Article 10 of the law says the application for registration of a trade union should be accompanied by the following documents. A, minutes of the inaugural Congress. B, the constitution of the organization. C, clearance certificate. And D, which is the problematic cause, says a nominal list of trade union members with an indication of the institution in which the worker rendered their services, date of birth, residential address, ID number, employment card number, and a notarized signature. So with an estimated workforce of about 325,000 workers in the public sector, you are looking at the union providing 16,000 notarized signature that should accompany the application for registration. So this is what is creating the problems for the union.
And that's it. International labor news you can use. Thank you for listening. And remember, it's all about global solidarity.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the Chef's Table, the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam, and our daily special is Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays. I failed to mention earlier that podcasts of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, as well as the Justice Department Musique Sans Frontières, can be had by way of Spreaker. And then emanating out of that, you can find it on Stitcher, TuneIn, I'm still hoping iTunes, and other platforms in which great podcasts can be found. And even mediocre ones, but they can be found there. All right, so as we're comfortably ensconced at the chef's table, we'll go through weather from around the world, and we begin along the banks of the Rogue River. In the Rogue River Valley of southern Oregon on the west coast of the continental United States of America, it is currently 25 degrees. We're going to be a bit warmer than yesterday. We're going to go up to 63. And then plummet down again into the low 30s tonight. And why wouldn't we? It's early March in the Northwest. We're going to be a bit drier, even though humidity will be at 83%. We consider that drying out. But rain will return tomorrow, late day. So currently, winds are out of the west-southwest about 2 miles per hour. And they will then become turning from the east-southeast tomorrow early at 5 to 10 miles per hour. So that's pretty good. Pressure is rising at 30.22 inches. Visibility is at 9 miles. I mentioned humidity was at 83%. The air quality index is only a moderate 90 parts per million. Not good for people to stay out for very long if you have breathing difficulties. So take care. Okay, so weather from around the world is brought to you by people's personal weather stations that they purchased. These people planted these personal weather stations somewhere on their property, and these people live around the world. London is 47 and mostly cloudy. Paris is 53 and mostly cloudy. Rome is 53 also, and mostly cloudy as well. Kiev is 30 degrees and fair. Kabul is 44 and clear. Hong Kong, 62 degrees and mostly cloudy. Tokyo, 42 and partly cloudy. Sydney, Australia, 68 and partly cloudy. San Francisco, California, 45 degrees and partly cloudy. And New York is 41 degrees Fahrenheit. And sunny as all hell. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by people's personal weather stations that they purchased. These people planted these personal weather stations somewhere on their property, and these people live around the world. So this article here by Ian Melheiser out of Think Progress is a bit complicated, and it's an extraordinarily technical case. This is Gundy versus United States, by the way, involving the legal obligations of sex offenders convicted more than a decade ago. Yet it also asks the Supreme Court to reopen a door that was nailed shut during the Franklin Delano Roosevelt administration, and should that door be opened, it could have sweeping legal consequences, potentially hobbling entire federal agencies and rendering much of American law unenforceable. Sounds like a master plan to me. You know, in the first Independence Day, when all of the alien spaceships were maneuvering all over, the great centers of commerce, cities and whatnot, all around the globe, moving their pieces here and there, making sure everything is nice and tidy. And the next thing you know, checkmate. Well, Gundy involves a Sex Offender Registration and Notification Act known as SORNA, which, as the name suggests, requires certain sex offenders to register in each jurisdiction where the offender resides, where the offender is an employee, and where the offender is a student. When a registered sex offender moves from one state to another, they are required to re-register in their new home state. The petitioner in this case, Herman Avery Gundy, was convicted of a sex offense in 2005. His case is unusual because he was charged with violating SORNA while he was still in federal custody. He allegedly violated the law by failing to register in New York after he was transferred from a prison in Pennsylvania to a halfway house in the Bronx. Gundy's lawyers argue that sex offenders are not required to register until they are released from custody, but the Supreme Court ignored these arguments. Instead, the court will consider a narrow question regarding the Attorney General's power to apply SORNA to Mr. Gundy, and depending on how the Supreme Court resolves this question, the court could potentially upend a vast array of environmental, labor, and other business regulations. Oh my God, and Gorsuch is on the court. Okay. Well, the provision of SORNA at issue in Gundy provides that, quote, the Attorney General shall have the authority to specify the applicability of the requirements of this subchapter to sex offenders convicted before the enactment of this chapter or its implementation in a particular jurisdiction, and to prescribe rules for the registration of any such sex offenders. All right. So Gundy's lawyers argue, however, that this delegation of authority to the Attorney General violates a largely defunct constitutional doctrine known as... No, it's not Dred Scott. It's only the anniversary of Dred Scott today, by the way. Not they're trying to bring Dred Scott back. I wouldn't put it above him. It could be next in line if you're trying to deconstruct the administrative state. Just make slavery legal. We could. But thank goodness that this is also the anniversary of the Big Lebowski. So I think really the Big Lebowski for America brought the whole room together. But non-delegation. The non-delegation doctrine briefly reared its head during the New Deal, at which time the Supreme Court used it to strike down laws delegating authority to the Roosevelt administration. It holds that there are limits on Congress's power to delegate certain authority to federal agencies, and that laws which exceed these limits are void. As a practical matter, however, the doctrine is difficult to administer, and the Constitution itself provides few hints on how courts should determine which delegations of power are unconstitutional. Even Neil Gorsuch, who as a 10th Circuit judge called the doctrine to be revived, acknowledged that delegation doctrine may not be the easiest to tease out, and it has been some time since the court has held a statute to cross the line. Well, Supreme Court, for its part, has held that Congress does not run afoul of the non-delegation doctrine unless it offers no guidance whatsoever to agencies on how they should delegate and exercise those delegated powers. So, Neil Gorsuch, yes. Nevertheless, there are many influential voices who would very much like to live in a world where non-delegation is wielded to halt progressive regulation. Beginning in the Obama administration, the Conservative Federalist Society grew obsessed with finding ways to roll back agency regulations and to cut out the legs of agencies like the EPA. Now the Federalists play a major role in choosing Trump's judicial nominees, including Supreme Court appointee Neil Gorsuch. And they remain just as obsessed with reviving doctrines such as non-delegation. What's next? Dred Scott? Come on. I think that we should bring back the Big Lebowski decision. Shut up, Donnie. That's what we should always say. Whenever there's a tweeter rage, just say, shut up, Donnie. The non-delegation doctrine is defunct largely because there are few good ways to determine when it should or should be invoked. Should or should not be invoked. So it is better to leave such matters up to an elected legislature than to give unelected judges a sweeping new power to invalidate federal regulations. But you go to court with the judges you have, not the ones you can rely on to exercise their power responsibly. The Republicans who control the Supreme Court are under considerable pressure to invigorate the non-delegation doctrine and to use it for partisan ends, especially before the whole shithouse goes up in flames.
danser maintenant sous l'été, les pieds nus dans le sable. Danser maintenant et jeter vos ennuis dans les vagues qui dansent.
Finishing up here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy is a very inspiring story by Valerie Vandepan out of Alternate. A very small town in Ohio has used the local library as an important place to connect with people that have a developmental disability. And when was the last time you ever talked to one? And odds are, according to statistics, probably never. And 1 in 7 children in America have some type of developmental disability, and 22% of U.S. adults live with some kind of disability. Now, Janice Sadler-Rice, the communications director of Montgomery County Board of Developmental Disabilities in Ohio, wants to change all that. Her group has taken an innovative and collaborative approach to tackling some of the fundamental issues. When the new Dayton Public Library opened downtown, Rice saw it as the perfect place to create an exhibit about people with developmental disabilities and to celebrate their lives and stories. So the Metro Library in Dayton loved the idea. The two groups collaborated and installed an exhibit called Empowering People. And the goal was to demonstrate how people with developmental disabilities contribute to the community, showcasing works by vocational artists with developmental disability. And the exhibit depicted the advantages of hiring those with a developmental disability and the contributions that they make to the workforce. And it presented information about how the use of language affects people and how they are perceived. And so I think this is very inspiring, and it's a model that could probably be used in a library near you. Hopefully you have a library near you. Many are closing, but that's still community space, and that's where we should meet up and find out who our neighbors are, and then those that we need to acknowledge as being really part of our community. And I think this is admirable of Montgomery County here. All right, brings us to the end of our broadcast period for the day. Here at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, but Networks Radio broadcasts on, so stay tuned for more breaking news. So much breaking news. So much. But go ahead and do that, please. And we will visit with you tomorrow in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théâtres, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. À fleurs sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goël. Je voudrais toujours te plaire dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme au long de golfe clair. T'embrasser les yeux ouverts dans mon jardin d'hiver. ba-da-dum-dee-da-dum. Ba-da-da-dum-dee-da-dum. Ba-da-da-dum-dee-da-dum. Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-dee-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver.